Greetings, everyone. I am the Reverend Dr. Jill Olds, the director of the Youth Ministry Institute at Yale Divinity School. The YMI is very pleased to welcome all of you to today's gathering entitled God's Dream, Children, Justice, and Faith with the Reverend Jairicus Collins. If this is your first event with us, a warm welcome to you. If we are well known to you, a warm welcome to you as well. We're delighted that you are here joining us on this journey. For our time today, Reverend Collins will speak to us, and then we will have a brief Q&A session at the end of his presentation. We ask you please remain muted throughout our time together, except when in breakout rooms or when asking questions at the conclusion of this time. We'll also be monitoring the chat window, so if you have a question there, please feel free to type it in at any time. Our office has a great staff. I'd like to introduce them to you quickly and thank them for their work. The Youth Ministry Institute falls under the purview of the Center for Continuing Education at YDS. So we are blessed today to have Kelly Morrissey, the managing director of the center, and Megan Lukens, our communications coordinator. Thank you, both Kelly and Megan, for being here, for all that you do, and more importantly, for who you are. If you are new to the Yale Youth Ministry Institute, we invite you to peruse our website when you get a moment. That is yaleyouthministryinstitute.org. We have a whole array of resources on there. There are curricula for your youth, training modules for youth leaders, discussion fora, over 1,000 video clips and lectures given by the world's leading youth ministry experts. We have resources for anti-racism work, for youth working through mental health challenges. We have mission and outreach endeavors, links to other articles and materials. All of that is available for free, so please do check out our website. This is our third gathering for this year's Lunch Lab series at the YMI. We'll be taking a pause after this event as we look towards holidays, but we do invite you to add Wednesday, February 4th to your long distance calendar. On that date, we will welcome Dr. Yu-Jung Choi, a professor of psychology and behavioral sciences. Dr. Choi will speak to us about child development, specifically social interactions in young children, and we will have conversation about how that can translate to faith communities. Please keep an eye out for your email inboxes in the next month or so. We'll detail registration info as we get closer to that time. All of our webinar efforts for this coming year are sponsored jointly by the YMI and the National Setting of the United Church of Christ denomination. We are so grateful to have the UCC as our partners in this work. The United Church of Christ has a Love of Children program, and it was awarded a $1.25 million grant through the Nurturing Children Through Worship and Prayer initiative by the Lilly Endowment. Through this program, the UCC has committed to an intentional 4-year-long period to research the state of children's ministry and equip ministry leaders to make meaningful changes to include children in the life of their church. Today, we have the Reverend Tyler Ung with us on today's webinar representing that program. Welcome to you, Reverend Ung. One such way the Love of Children is living out its purpose is through this partnership with us to create 6 educational webinars each year around some of the most pressing areas of children's ministry. Some topics therein include child development, storytelling with youth, tending to parents, children in worship, trauma-informed ministry with children, and like today's, fostering justice work and prophetic action in young people. If you would like to hear more about the Love of Children initiative, please visit the website. We'll post that in the chat. And now it is my pleasure to introduce all of you to today's speaker, the Reverend Jairicus Collins. The Reverend Jairicus Collins is the pastor of Justice and Outreach at First Free Church of Chicago, where he works in areas of equity and justice for the church and its surrounding community. He also serves as the program manager at Pride in the Pews, a national nonprofit organization advocating for the holistic health and well-being of Black LGBTQ+ individuals. The Reverend Collins is a graduate of Morehouse College and Yale Divinity School, where his academic interests included the study of homiletics, Black church studies, Black Pentecostal religious history, and his time at YDS included service as the Worship and Arts Chair at Andover Newton and as the personal research assistant for homiletics professor, the Reverend Dr. Danielle McCrae. While in Georgia, Reverend Collins served as the youth and young adult minister at First Mount Pleasant Baptist Church in Atlanta, and his love of justice was there combined with a passion for faith formation for all ages. Reverend Collins also serves as a co-instructor alongside yours truly for Yale Divinity School's certificate program in youth ministry leadership, where he routinely imparts wisdom in the areas of justice and fostering the spirit of empowerment within the lives of young people. Reverend Collins, welcome. We are honored and thrilled to have you here and to learn from you.
Thank you, Jill. I appreciate you for that. And it is exciting. I am hippopotamus happy and peacock proud to be in the Zoom land with each of you. So many familiar faces and names. And for those of you who don't know me, now you know, and now I know you as well. And I hope that we could connect even more throughout the duration of our time together. Special thanks to all who have made this webinar possible, to Kelly and Megan, who continue to make things move and shake, and to the Reverend Dr. Jill Olds, my sister, my comrade, my colleague. I appreciate you for extending the invitation. I want to start off with a prayer, one of my favorite prayers, the prayer of St. Francis of Assisi, a prayer for peace. I continue to say this prayer daily as I look at the reality of our world and climate. When I step outside, I just got a text message yesterday that ICE was on the corner of Ashland and Berwyn, and our church also sits on the corner of Ashland and Berwyn in Chicago, that ICE was terrorizing our community members. And so I have to continue to say this prayer, or I'll say something else that might not be as edifying. So I want to share this prayer with you. If you've never heard it, I hope that it speaks to your spirit. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled or to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. May it be so, beloved. Amen. Thank you for praying with me. I want to share my screen, and I want to ground our time today in this thematic thrust, God's dream. Give me 1 second. God's dream. Now, some of you may be asking, well, what does God dream about? We'll get into that as we go on, but I do believe that God does dream, and we want to live into the dreams that God has for us and for our children. So today we want to talk about God's dream, children, justice, and faith. Our structure this morning or this afternoon, where you may be, what does God dream about, and what does the Lord require of us? I really want to ground us in that thematic thrust. What does the Lord require of us today? Today, in our climate, in our world, today, in our ministry context, today, as we may be rearing and raising children, today, as we may be teaching and guiding children, today, as we may be retiring from doing that said work because you're tired and you've been doing it for so long. But what does the Lord require of us today? We will consider scripture and literature to speak to the intersection of children, justice, and faith. And we will intend to answer the question, how do we empower children to lead? This is a big piece of this webinar, not just talking about children and what we can do to guide children, but how might children lead us into what is possible, what is new, what is ahead of us, because I do think that they have a lot to give us in this time. And then our last piece is, where do we go from here? I'll share a ministry tool with you that will be helpful for you as you do the work of children, as you do your work with children around justice and faith. So, a little bit about me. Reverend Jill read my bio, but I am a son, I'm a brother, I'm a cousin, I'm an uncle. I hope that I'm somebody's best friend. At least I try to call my friends back. I'm a pastor, I'm an advocate, um, but I'm a child of God. And at an early age, when I was about 14 years old, I believed that I was called to ministry, and there was nothing else I wanted to do but ministry. And so, for almost 15 years, I've been serving in the Christian ministry. I'm from Athens, Georgia. Grew up in the Black Baptist and Pentecostal tradition there. I was born and raised in Athens and have some rural ministry experience, some city ministry experience. If you don't know Athens, you may know the Georgia Bulldogs. That is where Athens is, where the University of Georgia is housed. I know that I might not have any dog fans on here. That's fine. We're still friends. Um, but I hail from Georgia, and I matriculated and graduated from Morehouse College, where I obtained my BA in religion. I was ordained, I was licensed to preach at 18 by my local church. I'm a non-denominational ministry that was a part of a Baptist fellowship. And whenever somebody asked me about my denominational home, I said, well, I'm kind of a mutt because I was raised Pentecostal and Baptist, but then the church that licensed and ordained me is somewhat non-denominational, but they're very Baptist because Baptist people do these types of things like congregational people. Like nobody can tell them what to do but them, so they just name themselves whatever they want to name themselves. So that's kind of why I'm Baptist congregational. You get the point. So I was licensed at 18, then ordained at 24. 5 months before graduating from Yale Divinity School, I was thrust into an interim pastoralship near New Haven in Norwalk, Connecticut, at a Baptist church that was going through transition, and I was able to baptize babies and do funerals and do all the things that an interim does. And it helped me to see that I really love doing this work. I have served in just about every imaginable ministry position within the church, and I do not exaggerate that point. I've been in the choir, I can sing. I've been a usher on every usher board that exists in the church. I have been a junior deacon, which is basically you can be a deacon as a child. And so it's kind of for looks. You just get to sit on the deacon's row with the deacons. I mean, you're not really handling money or anything at 4 or 5 years old. So I've been a deacon, a junior deacon. I've served as a pastoral assistant, a young adult pastor, a youth pastor, youth director, pulpit supply, interim pastor, now serving as an instructor at Yale and staff pastor at the intersection of justice at First Free Church Chicago. But above all, what has really stuck with me is children and youth ministry, because I think it is the most sacred, one of the most sacred forms of ministry we could do. And that is leading and walking alongside our beloved young children. So that's a little bit about me. But I want to start by posing this question: what does God dream about? And Archbishop Desmond Tutu has something for us today. So, in that same vein, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who was an Anglican bishop from South Africa, shares this idea of the eagle and the eaglet, how this eagle was mistaken to be a chicken, right? That this eagle was never a chicken, and it was just in the wrong environment, that it was not meant to walk on the ground the same way that other chickens walked on the ground. But this strange looking chicken, as he says in his own way, was actually an eagle that needed someone to guide it to higher planes, to fly and to soar. And so it reminded me of Deuteronomy 32:11-13, that says, as an eagle stirs up its nest and hovers over its young, as it spreads its wing, takes them up and bears them aloft on its pinions, the Lord alone guided him. No foreign God was with him. He set him atop the heights of the land and fed him with the produce of the field. He nursed him with honey from the crags, with oil from flinty rock. This is a picture of our job as youth directors and people who care, children directors and people who care about children. We are convening today to be eagles who enable eaglets to fly. And not only does Bishop Tutu offer this image, but scripture offers this image of eagles letting their nest, stirring the nest. Often when the nest is stirred, when children begin to have a mind of their own, when children begin to gather a theology different than ours, we often say, well, that's the devil, or that's a wayward way. But maybe it is the Spirit stirring the nest so that those eaglets can fly. And so this is a thought that I want to guide our time with today, the eagle and the eaglet. But I want to start with some facts, because I think that when we talk about children, when we talk about the climate of our world, I think there are some things we should keep in mind. That there are 74 million people in our nation that are children. So that's about 22%. 1 in 4 of these children have at least one immigrant parent. I think that's important in the wake of so much tragedy, that 1 in 4 of the 74 million children in our nation have at least one immigrant parent, meaning that at least one of their parents is not native to American soil, which speaks to so many other realities. Roughly 6 million of these children are living with an undocumented parent or caregiver. And in the past decade, over 300,000 parents or caregivers who were deported had at least one American-born child. And about 13.8 million children, or roughly 1 in 5, lived with food-insecure households in 2023. And 60% of adults who are parents of children under 18 at home identify as Christian. Now, this didn't make sense to me when I first read it. And you can find this information at the Children Defense Fund.com, which does a lot of work with some children. I'm amongst UCC folks, so you know about the Children Defense Fund. And what surprised me was the 60% of adults who are parents to children under 18 at home identify as Christian. If those parents, over half of the parents who are parents to children under 18 who are part of that 74 million identify as Christian, then why are children going hungry? Why aren't there more parents speaking out? If 1 in 4 have at least one immigrant parent, why aren't there parents speaking out about the atrocities happening in Chicago and around the country where children are being separated from their homes, right? Why aren't more people saying something if 60% of those adults who may not be in the same experience as children of color or undocumented children or immigrant children, but you do identify as Christian? Why is there not something said about these realities? And I think when we talk about children, justice, and faith, it would behoove us to not just talk about these intersections from where we sit, but speaking about these intersections from a space of saying, well, I might not be in that experience, but what is my responsibility, right? As Bishop Tutu says, where is the goodness in each of us? Because we all possess that. What is my responsibility to speak to America, to speak to our nation? Because there are 13.8 million children who live in food insecure households. What is my responsibility, right? To speak to systems of power and structure that's arguing over SNAP and food stamps when there are children going hungry, where they're losing programs. And so this is how I ground the conversation, because in the wake of all of this, we still see war on children. If you look at this picture, this was taken at the US border where there are cages and aluminum foil for sheets. We saw this all 2020, and a lot of this is still happening. And so there are children present there. right? Instead of having actual sheets to sleep and actual beds to lay, they have to lay on cement with aluminum foil sheets. But there are 60% of adults who identify as Christians. So I don't understand why this is happening. Or we see children who are going through a lunch line at a local school here in Chicago that I have the joy of serving these kids every week through some programming, who are going through the lunch line. And what you don't know about this picture is that these children are receiving food that is funded by the government, and it's under siege because of the cuts and all the things. Um, so maybe that child won't have that lunch for that day. So, but there's still 60% of adults who identify as Christian. And so I'm trying to understand, where then is our work? What does the Lord then require of us? If these are the looming realities, my question is and remains, what does the Lord require of us? And scripture helps us understand that the Lord requires of us to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with our God. That means, in simplest terms, to provide shelter for houseless children, to give food and water to hungry children and thirsty children, to speak out for children who have experienced familial loss through the work of wickedness in high places. That our role as caregivers and guardians and parents and children ministry directors and pastors and faith leaders, and just our role as people who care about children, is to provide shelter, to give food and water, to speak out, to be an advocate for children everywhere. And so we cannot do this until we acknowledge the nightmare, right? Until we acknowledge the current reality of what is or has happened and is happening in our world. Because whether you know it or not, our children are seeing and sensing and feeling the same things that we're feeling. And so we have to acknowledge the nightmare so that we can speak truth to power. There was a chapter given to you from this book, The Anxious Generation, and I hope that you would lean into this book. Jonathan Haidt does a wonderful job arguing his claim. I do agree with much of what he said, but you will see through the duration of this presentation that I kind of push another thought. But he was an amazing thought partner. And in The Anxious Generation, he claims that Gen Z is the first generation to live on Mars and not on Earth. And he plays with this idea, right, that before children go off into this imaginary space, because we often say, well, let children imagine and let children be free and let them think big and let them go out into the world. He often he says that doing that often stunts their growth. Because he doesn't believe that they've not had enough time on Earth before we send them to Mars, and he correlates this allowing for children to live in this imaginary world through social media and cell phones as the cause of an epidemic of mental illness. And so he links the causing epidemic of mental illness amongst children, and he gives stats and facts, and he has a great argument, right? He links this to our inability to stop children from going to Mars, stopping them from not being on their cell phones or tablets or having a social life. He then correlates how young girls are more prone to see themselves in a different light because of social media, or how young boys take on a personas because of what they saw. And we know the rise of podcasts, what people are hearing and seeing. And he really takes his approach that all of this is causing an epidemic of mental illness amongst our children. So he talks about popular culture and its effect on children's development and growing up on Mars, and the loss of the state of play. And then he continues to talk about this surge of suffering. And the thing that I leaned into in his work that I really agree with this claim is that a lot of the reasons why there's a surge of suffering and why children are more anxious and why they lean into social media and cell phones and all of the things, right? That some of you may can testify to the fact that you may have children or grandchildren or may serve children where they might not be in the best mood, but if you give them a tablet, things change. That is a true thing, right? That their attention span is very different from how many of us would have been raised or grew up because we did not have the reality of social media and electronics in the same way. But he talks about world events and global crisis as a reason for mental health crisis amongst children. And I kind of want to lean into this because I think that we can blame social media and tablets and electronics as the reason why children have mental illness, that children can't survive without a tablet. And the tablet is the only thing. The tablet is a new pacifier in many cases, and all of that. We can lean into that. I think that's an easy answer. But I really think that we're not realizing how world events and global crisis is affecting our children, that they are hearing, that they are seeing, that they are feeling the effects of everything happening around us, right? That when we feel the things that we've heard on the news and the cuts and the hate, the fear, the racism, all of the isms that we are faced with, children too feel and see and hear, and they don't have all the time the language to talk about it, but they are also experiencing it while we are experiencing it. And so my question for you to ponder is, what role do adults play in creating nightmares for children in their waking lives? Now, I know that that is an interesting question, but it leads me to ask this question. All of what Jonathan points to leads me to ask this question. Not that social media and all the things is necessarily the one that gets pointed at, and we play the blame game towards the social media companies and the cell phone companies and the tablet making companies. But no, no, no. Why are children more comfortable behind a digital screen than with their parents? Why are children losing interpersonal skills? Could it be that the great rewiring of childhood is a direct result of irresponsible adults? Could it be that irresponsible world leaders and preachers and teachers and parents that we're now having to face the reality that children need more than regurgitated theologies, right? That children need more than just, oh, well, this is our children's ministry. We're just going to give them something to eat and drink and they can do whatever. Is the problem what we're pointing to as social media and all the things, or is the problem what we're not pointing to, which is the ways that we are irresponsible, right? The ways that we have not spoken to problems and systems of oppression. And we assume that our children are not noticing. But maybe, just maybe, I'm suggesting that we're playing a role in creating these nightmares or creating these lived realities for children where they feel trapped, where they feel like their only outlet is a tablet, their only outlet is social media, their only outlet is the lack of interpersonal, in-person connection. And so I want to offer this as a thought. What role do adults play in creating nightmares for children in their waking lives? And ponder on that. We'll have some time to share in a moment. But then we have to deal with this elephant in the room. How then, not only do we talk about children, justice, and faith through the lens of raising children in a social media age, but also raising children in a racist world, right? Because we can talk about social media, but it's also linked to the racism in the world. Jennifer Harvey, in our book, Raising White Kids, talks about the role of parents as it pertains to teaching their children about injustice and the way of love, which I think is important to this conversation because the way we think of childhood in America, and my major claim in this is even households of color, even non-white households have often taken on this as a norm, right? That whiteness and the lack of diversity, right? We don't understand this point that whiteness and the lack of diversity is a threat to this ultimate dream that we call God's dream. And often we take the approach that the American dream is only a dream for some, right? Because, oh, well, this is the way that children should function, and this is the way that children should go. And but what we don't realize is that we're trying to put children in a box that has been manufactured to only fit some. That there is no correct way, I don't believe, for children to experience Jesus, right? That children from different backgrounds and different cultures and different places will experience Jesus in a very different way, right? Than children born in certain zip codes and certain places. And so I think what Jennifer raises as a white woman who was raising white children, she raises a brave claim, right? She puts it out there like, listen, she had to come to the realization that she had to begin to raise healthy white children in a racially unjust America. And the reason I bring this today is because I know that many of you probably saying, well, I serve in a particular context. I don't serve in a multicultural or multi-ethnic context. I may serve in a more white context. But this is a conversation that we can lean into because I think it speaks to what is blocking our efforts to teach children about justice. You cannot teach children about justice or reorient them in the ways of justice if you're not truthful or honest about what got us here. And that is the way that we have assumed how childhood should work, right? Well, these are the things that every child should have, or these are the things that every child should think, or these are the ways that we should orient every child. And that's not the case. It might be how we have unknowingly leaned into whiteness. And so Jennifer Harvey, if you have not read this book, really raises these claims. And she continues and she talks about, she asks this question, what does resistance look like, right? If we know that the dominant culture, that the dominant looming culture says that childhood looks this way, that this is what makes a healthy childhood, that it should look like this and be in this box, what does resistance then look like? And I go back to Harvey because she then begins to help us to understand resistance looks like teaching our children to have a stake in the conversation. Meaning, if children are going to have a stake in the conversation, we then, right, teaching, particularly she says, teaching white children to have a stake in the conversation. She talks about her daughter who asked a question about the Black Lives Matter movement, and she's having a conversation with her daughter about the realities. Her child, she's having a conversation, a white woman having a conversation with a white child about these things, and she comes to the realization that her daughter has to have a stake in this conversation because she has questions about, well, but if he, George Washington, held slaves, why do we celebrate him as if he was such a great man? Her daughter asked her this question, which goes back to my point that children are noticing, that they are feeling, that they are also in these realities. And so Harvey encourages us to retell the history again and to tell it in the correct way. But also having a stake in the conversation is how are we encouraging children to have their own sorts of protests or encouraging them to be activists in their own way. And that does not look like, because I know the fear and we've We can talk about the fear for many parents is, well, I don't want my children out in a protest, and I don't want them alone. I can't keep supervision of them. Well, activism is not the same. Activism is not just protesting in the streets, but activism can be through writing, and through speech, and through the folks that they connect with, because we all do activism in different ways. And so, I encourage you to think about ways you can encourage children to be activists in their own way, to have a stake in the conversation. Springtide research found that 58% out of 10,000 youth reported engaging in protests as a religious or spiritual act. And so we have to now deal with the reality, because Gen Z is forcing us to really lean into this reality, that community engagement many times is a spiritual exercise for them, right? That they get that they are experiencing the body of Christ through protest, right? That they are having communion with God through locking arms with sisters and brothers who are not of the same hue, may not be from the same places, who are experiencing great injustice, right? And that is hard for us to sit in, right? Because no, I don't mind other children being a part of this, and I know other children are affected, and I know that there are 1 in 5 children who are living in food insecure homes, and there's much for people to protest, but not my child, right? Because it's too dangerous, right? It's too risky. Right. It's not enough. I don't want them speaking out against their teachers, because they should obey authority, right? I know it's wrong, but they should be obeying authority. They're a child. And so it's hard for us, and I just want to offer this as something for us to wrestle with. It's hard for us to consider that for many of our children, they consider community engagement as spiritual exercise, that's the way they connect, that through community and protest and speaking out, through rallying, through writing, through petitioning their Congress persons, they see that as an act of protest. And I give it on a more mature level, meaning, as from a young adult level, I give this story of when I was at Yale Divinity School, because like we were a generation removed from Gen Z, so it's kind of like they're our little brothers, sisters, and cousins. So this kind of tricks, and so if we did this, I can imagine them doing much more. I was on the I was a student and faculty liaison, and in that role, I had a chance to bring concerns of students to the faculty. And one of the concerns was how Yale as a whole, and Yale Divinity School in particular, was ableist in the ways that we did graduation. And so, if you know anything about Yale Divinity School graduation, you have to go up the arch of stairs to grab your diploma, to grab your degree, and walk down. But there are folks who are not able to do that. And so we thought that it was worth us talking about, like, listen, we're not coming to graduation unless y'all change this. So it wasn't kind of like, yeah, like we need to talk about this. It was like, no, actually, our demand is a lot of us won't show up unless y'all actually do something to make sure that everybody can experience graduation in the same way. And that was the first year they changed it, right? Because of the activism among young people or young adults we were. And I come to tell you that Gen Z will do those things and much more. Um,
Wow.
and I think that we should consider that they find spirituality, that they find it as being valuable. That in many cases, I know a lot of the young people that I've served. I mean, they don't even have a disconnect between community engagement and spirituality. It's like one and the same. So it's kind of like, of course you have to serve people. Of course, like we need to do things to make sure that people are eating. Of course, like we need to have community engagement opportunities. Of course, like we're not just gonna sit here and do lessons, but we're actually gonna like live that out. So it's like one and the same. And I think that's important to consider as we consider children's ministry and how do we go. So our mandate then is fostering dreamers and dreams, right? So we've dealt with the nightmare that these looming realities exist, and that children are experiencing them. But it is our job, I believe, to foster dreamers and dreams, to empower children to lead, to empower children to take the things that we find valuable about our faith, to take the best parts of who we are, right? And to lead us into the next reality, greater realities, greater horizons. And Ibram Kennedy, if you've never heard of him, he's an amazing author, great brother, who talks about how to be an anti-racist. And so, if children are going to become the ones to foster new dreams and go into living out what I call God's dream, we then have to empower them to not be what we once were or once struggled with in generations before. And it seems to be that racism, sexism, all the isms continue to be the thing that's holding us back from realizing God's dream, right? So he gives a working definition for anti-racism, which is the practice of actively identifying and opposing racism. The goal of anti-racism is to actively change policies, behaviors, and beliefs that perpetrate racist ideas and actions. And so I offered this as a way for you to think about how do you shape your programming? How do you shape the way that you talk to children, or the way that you teach children, or the way you walk and mentor children, right? To create children who are anti-racist, which connects with anti-sexist and anti-classist, and it connects to all of that, right? And so I think Kendi gives us a way, and he talks about further this idea of assimilation and integration, teaching children that we are not meant to assimilate, or we're not meant to cause others to say, well, everybody else is doing it, so they just need to get on board, or we're not meant to say that we want to be a I've dealt with this so much. We want to be a multicultural ministry, but there's no multicultural representation. And when the folks that you want to come, or the trans folk and the queer folk and the people of color, when they come, are they comfortable? Are you making it open enough for them to feel like they actually have a voice and a place and a seat at God's table, right? So it's not about assimilation, but it's about true integration, right? How do we include folk, right? And so Kendi gives us a way forward, that our goal with our children is to teach them about healthy and holy, as I call healthy and holy integration, right? That to teach our children that it's okay to be friends with folks that you differ from. It's truly okay, right, to be a Christian and have Muslim friends. It is truly okay for you to be born female, but to also have a trans friend who transitioned to female. It's okay, right? And so we have to teach children how to have healthy and holy integration. And I think that that is the best way forward. And then Kendi talks about the work of reconciliation, which, as I go back to Jennifer Harvey, Raising White Kids, it's telling the truth about what caused for us to be disjointed in the first place, right? And I'll get more into that in our takeaway tool, because I really believe that it will be helpful for you moving forward. And then Kendi talks about how young people and their stories are really important to creating children who are leaving behind these isms, this racist and sexist past that we are still struggling with. We have to honor young people's stories, that they have something, that they've seen and felt and experienced things that we have not, right? And so honoring their stories as a way forward into what's ahead of us. So I want to tell this quick story about Jack and his piggy bank. Jack And I just used his first name, and I did ask mom and everybody about this. Jack is a one of my mentees who is in the seventh grade, who I met years ago when I was serving as a youth director in Kenilworth, Illinois. A little bit about Kenilworth is that it is north of Chicago. It's not in Chicago, and Kenilworth is 96% or so white, and it's one of the wealthiest communities in the U.S. Average household income is about 350, $400,000. And so I was serving at a church there, an Episcopal church there, and Jack and his family lived in the neighborhood. They had moved from New York, and so they were used to being a part of justice-centered churches. Church I was serving at was trying to do that work, and so that's why I was hired along with others. And but they were in this rich suburban neighborhood, and so it was hard to kind of do that work. And so but there was this kid named Jack who just wouldn't leave me alone. Now I'm the first black minister and clergy person there. Um, and Jack is this white child who I didn't think I had anything to give, right? Because he seemingly had everything. He lived in the big house. He had all of the access. His parents were able to afford him with many things. But Jack would not leave me alone. And I remember we did some outreach things, and he would always be so excited about doing it. And not only would Jack just be excited, but he would want to come from start to finish. He would want to know about like, so when are we going to do this again? And how can we think about ways I want to help? And so he just really loved the idea. At the time he was in the fourth grade when I met him. And so he was just excited about being a part of justice work. And I'm trying to, and I'm thinking in my mind, like maybe he's just doing this, maybe he doesn't mean this. But as I began to walk alongside Jack, I saw that he had something in him that had to come alive, that he was located in an area, but his heart was really in areas that needed so much, needed a hand, needed someone to walk alongside them to experience justice. And so he had this goal to fill his piggy bank and fill it with money. And he was like, you know what I want to do? I said, what is that? I want to fill my piggy bank and give it all away to a local mission. I said, well, in my mind, I'm thinking, well, it's not going to be much, but this is such an aspirational thing, right? And I couldn't believe he said it. And so I said, okay, well, we'll talk about it. So I talked to his mother and father, and they were like, yeah, he's just really been on this, and we don't know how he got this idea, but he's passionate about it. And we give him an allowance every week, and he's putting the entire allowance in the piggy bank. Like he's putting 20 and 30 and $40 in this piggy bank. We don't know how much is in it, but he's determined to give it to this local mission. I said, okay. So he continues to collect it over the course of a year, and he's stuffing this piggy bank. I give him a little money from time to time. Like, put this in the piggy bank. Make sure that makes it to the piggy bank, because this is something that you want to do, right? Do all the things. And there is this organization called Breakthrough Urban Ministries that has an annual walk for hunger in West Garfield Park, Chicago, that is ravaged by so many things. And Breakthrough is trying to be a solution, partnering with the community, hiring and empowering directors from the same community to do violence prevention and to serve as nurses and doctors. And the cool thing about Breakthrough is that it started at my church, First Free. It started at the church, First Free, in our basement. And it started as a shelter for men and women and children who needed food and a place to sleep. And our fellowship hall back in the late 90s was a shelter, was a day shelter. And it got so, it became such a thing of its own that we had to find a place to establish Breakthrough. And so Breakthrough moved to the West Garfield Park neighborhood. And now their operating budget is well over $2 million, but it started right here in this little ragtag church, First Free Church. And Jack wanted to give his money away at the annual Walk for Hunger. And I'm like, okay, well, Jack, we all just got to sign up. So decided to sign folks up. Who wants to go to Walk for Hunger? We walk a mile. We're walking a mile to symbolize how we're going to deal with the food insecurity problem in Chicago. And so we're walking miles. You see these folks here. There's about 100 or so people, 100 or so people in the crowd. And so we walk a mile together around the neighborhood. And Jack contributed a few $100s from his piggy bank. I'm like, oh, Jack, he could really use that. But he contributed that, which went with the annual goal that was over $500,000 of money going directly to solve the food insecurity problem. And so I had to learn to encourage Jack, right? He had this idea that was just him and his piggy bank that seemed insignificant, but that was actually so powerful. And I don't know if you could find me here, but we're somewhere in this crowd. And just to see how he was around other folks who may had jobs and salaries and all the things, right? And he had the money from his piggy bank, but he was a part of ensuring that the West Garfield Park community and the greater Chicago community had food. And so I offer that as an example of how we can walk alongside young people. That was his way of being an activist, right? That was his way, right? I counted it out, and it was such a transformative moment for me because I'm like, Jack has everything every kid will want, right? Everything that every kid probably could even imagine, but he decided to do something that was in his own ability, right? He didn't need help from anybody, but he took what he had to do something transformative. And I'm proud of him. And so this is a model, right, that we could use as we encourage and walk alongside young people. So we'll have a time for small groups at this time, Megan. I would love for us to open those, but for the next about 10 minutes, with about 2 or 3 folks in each group, I want you to kind of think about ways you intend to foster dreams and dreamers in your children's ministry context. How do you plan on incorporating lessons and curriculum and activities that really encourage children to dream, beyond the nightmares of our current realities? But then I want you to deal with, and I've kind of given a few questions for you to kind of pick through. What roadblocks come up for you immediately? Because we know that this is not easy work. Maybe you're in a context that's like, I've been in these contexts before. Well, we actually don't want to talk about it. We don't want to talk about politics. We don't want to talk about this. We don't want to talk about that. Just preach the gospel. Well, this is the gospel. Anyway, what roadblocks come up for you immediately when you think about doing this work? But then think about who is affected if you allow for those roadblocks to have the last word, right? Who is affected if you don't speak to these things? Who is affected if you don't teach children about a new way? But then you can also deal with this question: what excites you about fostering dreamers in your children's ministry context? So for about 10 minutes, I just want you to connect with folks, and we'll come back and talk about it. And I'll open to anyone who would like to share what you spoke about in your small groups, right? I want to give a final tool, and I will be out of your hair. I want to share my screen once more. Give me 1 second. And hopefully you can see my screen. This is a way forward, which is a tool for you, and you should be receiving an email with links to all of these things. But this is a way forward, a tool for anti-racist, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, children ministry formation. And so I wanted to offer this tool for you. So, this tool is called Sowing Seeds in the Sand, which was formerly called Tell the Truth About Racism. And there are my wonderful colleagues. Jen is online with us right now. Wave it. And they have an amazing team and ministry of really helping folks to see, to have conversations that honor the complex historical truths, but also reimagine. But conversations that are reimagined to become accessible for children to talk about things like racism and climate change and all of the things. And Sowing Seeds in the Sand's original story seeks to answer the question, how do we tell the truth about racism? And as you see this lovely sand and clay figures, this is how how they tell the story. And I say we because I've told the story, if I'm correct, are still free for leaders to be connected on how to tell the story. I love how Will and Jen say, listen, we all can talk about racism, but we just want to ensure that you're talking about it. Like, we're going to give you tools on how to talk about it so you don't have to figure out how to talk about it. Our children to learn how to tell the story in the sand about racism. Um, and this is one of those stories with the clay figures. And you may recognize that bridge, which is the Edmund Pettus Bridge, which is um, in Alabama, that bridge that John Lewis went across, and so many other activists. And then there's a bus that also tells the story of the racist acts and um, those atrocities that happen to people who were fighting for justice. And so we can tell that story in the sand to children. We don't have to say, well, they don't need to know this history and it's too hard to tell. But if you follow the story in the sand, it makes it accessible for them to know what it means when we put a bridge in the sand, or we put a heart in the sand, but then we put a cross in the sand, and then we put a chain in the sand. Well, wait, I thought that we started with love and then we have Jesus, but then there's chains, there's separatism. How does that all work? It allows for children to wonder and to ask questions, so that we're just not saying, oh, we're children, we can't explain these complex things to children, but we actually have an answer for them. I hope that you all would connect. Go to www.sowingseedsinthesand.org. I'm telling you, slash approach. I'm telling you, this is an amazing resource, and you should get connected. You should figure out ways on how to tell the story, or um, do it in different ways, as Jen just mentioned. But it is an amazing resource if you're trying to deal with the issues of anti-racism, all of the other isms. And so I'm grateful to share this resource with you. Here's another resource page, just the books and the tool for ministry. Again, go to Sowing Seeds in the Sand. I really want you to go there. You'll get an email about all of that. Um, Yep. And thank you for listening. We are at time, and I am just so grateful for each of you for listening and sharing space with me today, hearing me out. Feel free to send any questions and inquiries and or inquiries to jarikas@gmail.com. I would love to talk with you, share with you, encourage you, send any book references. I mentioned 3 books today and some articles, some stats. And so I'm so grateful for you being with us today. And I think that is all. I want to pass it back over to Reverend Jill. Thank you all so very much.
Reverend Jairicus, thank you so much. Everyone, thank you for your time. We wish you every blessing in this upcoming holiday season. Please be in touch with us if you need additional resources for this work of justice with children. And we will be sending out these takeaways to you in the next day or two. Thank you for your time. Blessings on your ministries.